Hello, folks. Welcome back to Talking Stuff, the Ohio State recruiting podcast on LettermenRow.com. I am Jeremy Birmingham, your host. With me, as always, is Spencer Holbrook. Today's edition of Talking Stuff is sponsored by our good friends at Byers Automotive. Spencer, thanks for taking some time. For those of you who are watching this on the internet, please understand that we are filming this just minutes before the Clemson LSU National Championship game, and it's hard, right? It's hard, Spencer. It's still hard.
It's pretty crazy. When we were at Roosters earlier today for the Lettermen Live, hosted by Roosters, there was 3 TVs with the Ohio State Clemson game on, and every time you looked up, you just knew. Every time you looked up, even though you knew the score, it was like, oh, Ohio State's going to win this game. And then obviously we know what happened. Yeah, it's pretty crazy to see the 2 teams on the field tonight, and one of them not being in scarlet and gray.
Yeah, I mean, but that is football, right? I mean, you take one on the chin. It's a heartbreaking loss. You got to pack up your stuff and move on. Ohio State moved on, back home to Columbus. And in the last 2.5 weeks since that Fiesta Bowl loss to Clemson, it has been an extremely quiet time on the recruiting trail. And since we are talking stuff about Ohio State football recruiting, it makes it a little bit difficult for us. But thankfully, right now, there is this weird want to be discussed thing out there, which is 5-star running back Zach Evans. On Monday afternoon on the website on LettermenRow.com, I wrote about Zach Evans and his recruitment and the possibility of Ohio State getting involved in it. Zach Evans is the number 1 ranked running back in the country, okay, folks? So, I mean, we're talking about a player that if you take away anything but his talent, you would be left with a can't-miss, no-doubt type prospect. And unfortunately, as I kind of dove into a little bit in the story, I didn't want to go too much into it because it's really not my story to tell. Evans has had some maturity issues. And Spencer, there's this line of thinking that Ohio State is one of the programs in the country that right now the program is so solid that you could see them being like, hey, we could handle this. But like, is the risk of one bad apple spoiling a bunch so great that you don't even want to go out on a limb and say, hey, we have so many good dudes on our team that maybe they could withstand or help this one guy?
I think it's more of you don't want to crack what's going on. Ohio State recruits such quality kids. You never hear anything bad coming out of Ohio State as far as what the kids are doing off the field. And to take a risk and to have to potentially maybe kick somebody off the team down the road just because you took a risk there, I just don't think it's worth it for Ohio State. I really don't. And that's weird because he's a 5-star kid and he's one of the top players, one of the top running backs that we've seen in the last few years come out of high school. And I do not think it's worth it for Ohio State to take the risk. And it just makes too much sense for me to have Ohio State. They know what they have in a character guy with Marcus Crowley. They know what they have with Steele Chambers. They know what they have with Master Teague. They just lost J.K. Dobbins. That room's going to have to be mature in the way that it handles itself throughout the next 2 years to survive, life without J.K. Dobbins. And to bring somebody in who has, some questionable issues on whether he can be a mature member of the room, I just don't think it's worth the risk.
Yeah, and I think it's important to underscore the speculation and the rumors and all that stuff around Zach Evans is not that he's like a bad kid. He's not out there beating up women or doing drugs or any of that kind of stuff from what we hear. It's really just a matter of maturity and a matter of a kid who's entitled and it has been sort of seen as a cash cow down the road for some people in his family. And I think that that has maybe changed the way that he approaches some things. I've talked to coaches around the country, not just coaches that work at Ohio State. And the constant thing I've heard is that he's just kind of a jerk. And I don't want to even say that about a 17 or 18-year-old kid. But, the thing is when you're dealing with a player of such high caliber talent and such a big position, on a football team, I almost think that if Ohio State had a player like J.K. Dobbins returning next year, that it would be easier to justify taking a player like Zach Evans, because then you would at least have some sort of sounding board or somebody who could kind of guide him. And I think with Master Teague and Marcus Crowley and Steel Chambers, you're talking about a redshirt sophomore and then two redshirt freshmen, or one sophomore and one redshirt freshman in Chambers. And none of them have like that big leader personality that, that's really you could get behind. And I think that could play a part in this. And that's why I think no matter what happens with Jahmyr Gibbs, and I sort of left it open-ended in the column on Monday, but talking to people Monday afternoon and into Monday evening, it just really seems like Ohio State is not going to go down that road.
And one thing that I think we need to remind people of is that Jahmyr Gibbs and Zach Evans would be great icing on the cake for this class, but the class is full. Yeah. The 85 is full.
Yeah, they're at 89 right now, so there's still going to be a number of things happening. Go ahead.
If you take Zach Evans, you have to make room, and you don't make room when you take a risk. If you had 84 already, if there was 84, if Baron Browning and all three offensive linemen went to the draft and one guy decided to transfer, whoever that might be, and you're at 84 and you're at 84, it might be worth it to say, hey, we're only at 84. We don't see another guy in the next 6 weeks committing. Even with Cam Martinez, we're only at 84. Hey, let's take Zach Evans. That'd be fine. But you would have to completely, make room, shut somebody else out who doesn't have character issues just to bring in this risk that may or may not work out.
Yeah. And again, for people who haven't watched Zach Evans, like, it's very important to see what we're talking about. Go out, watch his tape, check out his huddle. He's a phenomenal running back. I mean, you're talking about the number one ranked running back in the country. And if you've read Lettermen Row, you know how I felt about Bijan Robinson as a player, but Zach Evans as a straight up running back is better. Bijan is a better guy out of the backfield, better pass catcher, a guy that is a no character risk. And that's what you get with Zach Evans. And I think I just want to underscore the point and reiterate from talking to people Monday afternoon after my Dotting the I's column went up on LettermenRow.com, the impression I'm getting very strongly is that Ohio State has decided that they are not going to kick the tires on Zach Evans, even if things don't work out with Jahmyr Gibbs, who makes his official visit to Ohio State this coming weekend. One source that I talked to who covers high school football in Texas told me that if you could, you would take Jahmyr Gibbs 5 times before you would take Zach Evans once, based on the caliber of kid he is and the fact that the talent gap between them isn't nearly as large as the accountability / personality gap. So take that for what it's worth. Things can change. I mean, that's the beauty of recruiting, and I guess the nightmare of recruiting. If things go out this weekend and Jahmyr Gibbs tells the Buckeyes, hey, there's no way I'm coming to Columbus, no way I'm flipping from Georgia Tech, maybe the Buckeyes panic and decide, hey, we'll reach out. But from what I've been told, it has been Evans who's been reaching out to the Buckeyes, and he has had conversations. There has been some initial getting to know you, but this is a thing that started with him back in the summer when he wanted to visit Ohio State, and we talked about that on the website back in June. And I wrote it then, but that was going to be like a proving ground for him to show Ohio State if he was actually interested in them or just looking for some clout by being at Ohio State and having people on Ohio State talk about him. And then he never showed up, and nobody really expected him to. So who did show up for Ohio State, though, was Miyan Williams. And I think that people need to understand the Cincinnati Winton Woods running back, that he's a 3-star tailback, and I know people are caught up in the stars, and justifiably so, because star rankings do matter. But Miyan Williams ran for like 6,000 yards in Division I in college in Ohio football. That's pretty good.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure we talked about that, because if Ohio State wasn't in the running for Jahmyr Gibbs and Bijan Robinson and Jalen Knighton at the beginning of this cycle, people would be through the moon and say, well, the recruiting rankings don't really matter. Miyan Williams is a good back. But since Ohio State lost out on a couple of 5-star backs, I mean, we could even throw Kendall Milton in there for a little while. But, for Ohio State to lose out on 2 5-stars, another 4-star, and end up with an in-state 3-star, everybody just kind of looks at him and thinks, yeah, he's not that good. They still need Jahmyr Gibbs. Miyan Williams is a good running back. That kid can run. And I think people are really selling him short. He's become kind of like a chopped liver. So, I mean, and he shouldn't be. He's more of a nice cut steak than he is chopped liver.
Yeah, I mean, I think what people see with Miyan Williams is he's a guy that, the numbers don't necessarily blow you away when you're talking about his verified results, but he last ran a verified 40-yard dash in May of 2018. Okay, so, and that was a 4.74. So that was almost a year and a half ago. In the time of his life, it's pretty important when it comes to development. So he was probably 16 when he did that. He's going to be going on 18 now. His shuttle time is in that 4.2 range. His vertical's not through the roof. He's 5'10" and maybe 220 pounds. I'm telling you, when I saw him at the Ohio State-Penn State game in November, you see the kid and you're like, Jeepers Creepers, this kid is a tank. And like, I'm telling you, there's something about him, and I've sort of been put on the spot a little bit by people in the last few weeks who've asked me randomly, like, who do you think leads Ohio State in rushing in 2020 outside of Justin Fields probably? And I think it could be Miyan Williams. I really do. I think that he is the type of runner that is going to be a perfect complement to what Justin Fields will do. And if Marcus Crowley isn't 100% healthy, and we still have no idea what his situation is, Master Teague, I know he has explosiveness and the ability to run away from people, but it's hard to ignore the fact that in the last 4 games of the season against the Buckeyes' best competition, he looked rather pedestrian at times. And then Steel Chambers, you don't know what you're going to get because he just hasn't had the opportunity. But I think that when you're talking about really unproven redshirt sophomore, redshirt freshman, true freshman, there's no reason that Miyan Williams couldn't take that job. It's not like running back you have to come in and learn the playbook like you do at quarterback or if you're physically ready to go. J.K. Dobbins showed it in 2017. If you're physically ready to go, you can come in June and still be the man by September. And J.K. Dobbins did it after not playing his senior year because of a broken ankle.
Yeah, I think you make some pretty good points there. If all of those things are already on the roster, if all those guys aren't ready, Miyan Williams could step in and learn the playbook and learn under Tony Alford pretty quickly. And Tony Alford seems like an easy guy to learn from. J.K. Dobbins came in and played early. Mike Weber played early. So it just makes sense. If Miyan Williams is ready, he will play, and he will play. I think he's going to play pretty well. I just think we need to – Ohio State, the fans and the people surrounding the program just need to kind of be a little higher on Miyan Williams than they have been.
Yeah, and again, I don't think that people should feel bad about wanting Ohio State to sign 5-star running backs.
I agree, yes.
Because it does matter. Recruiting rankings and stars do matter. It's proven over and over and over again. Yes, there are the outliers, and there are the guys that are 3 stars that turn into big-time players, but the fact is, when you're projecting 32 players a year that are 5-star prospects, those players are projected there because they're really special. And that's not to say that other guys can't be undervalued or that they don't develop later, but this idea that Ohio State can't recruit running backs is just silly to me. When you look at what they've done with J.K. Dobbins and Crowley and, Brian Snead, who was a top 40 player in the country before he made a dumb mistake and got himself kicked out of Ohio State. But that circles right back around to Zach Evans, right? Like, that's why it doesn't matter how good a player is if he's not able to keep himself in your, in your lineup.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. We've already hammered that nail a lot.
Yeah,
Zach Evans,
exactly.
Probably not in. Miyan Williams, definitely in. Should be more excited about him. And the running back recruiting, we can almost, after this weekend when you find out more about Jahmyr Gibbs, we'll be able to really have a crystal clear picture of what the roster is going to look like in the running back room.
Yeah, and I'm not going to be surprised if Tony Alford and Ryan Day have something else up their sleeve. I think that it's clear that they've wanted 2 running backs in this class for the entire cycle. I know there is at least some concession at this point. Like, if it's only one and it's Miyan Williams, that's fine. But clearly they're still pursuing Jahmyr Gibbs. They did examine the possibility of Zach Evans. The idea is if they can find someone else that's out there that's really special, that they'll bring them in. And I don't know what Alford and Day have cooking, but I'd be shocked if they didn't have something else lined up in the event that things didn't go right with Jahmyr Gibbs, and then that would preclude them from still needing to move on Zach Evans. So anyway, let's finish up here this episode of Talking Stuff, the Ohio State Recruiting Podcast, brought to you by Lettermen Row. This week's episode sponsored by our good friends at Byers Automotive. Let's just talk a little bit more about the 2020 group. As you mentioned, it is full. I mean, there's 24 signees, 25 commitments total right now as Cameron Martinez remains committed but unsigned. People are kind of probably waiting to see what the heck happens at defensive back because there is this idea that they need to go get another one. But just to wrap up the thought about the 2020 class, which is at this point seeming like it's going to be another running back or bust, I don't think that the addition of Kerry Combs, whenever it does happen, I don't think it's going to impact things one way or another when it comes to adding another defensive back other than solidifying Cameron Martinez.
Yeah, I think it's going to be just a matter of, you're going to roll with what you got. Ohio State's going to probably go into the season with some sort of combination of Josh Proctor, Cam Brown, those guys in the secondary with Sean Wade and Kerry Combs. I just don't know if there's enough time to make a move and to persuade a kid to get to Columbus and become part of the class. And I don't, like we keep saying, I don't know if there's room. If they take another running back, if Jahmyr Gibbs decides Ohio State's going to be his home, there's not going to be any room for another defensive back. And if Jahmyr Gibbs doesn't, then there still might not be any room for another defensive back. They might have to make room just for Gibbs. So I think it's going to be one of those things where you just kind of roll with it at this point. I think the guys in the class now, unless Jahmyr Gibbs decides to come, are the guys that are going to be in the class on opening day in September.
Yeah, as we mentioned, there's now 89 guys on the roster. That number is going to need to be parsed down to 85 by August. And I'm not in the habit or the business of speculating on who could leave or who may transfer out or what else could happen. But you certainly expect at this point a handful of guys that are currently with the program not being there by the end of the spring. I don't know what positions those guys will come from, but it is a make or break spring for a lot of guys. But it's also a situation where Ryan Day needs to be able to have his roster the way he wants it. So it's going to be interesting in the next 3 weeks until the February 5th signing day what they do, because the defensive back coach part of this is one piece of the puzzle. But again, as I said, I don't know that it would really matter, because ultimately, how do you add more guys to this class, especially somebody that you're having to offer this late and maybe you aren't entirely sold on. If the Buckeyes can get lucky and someone like Darnay Holmes, who we've talked about, doesn't end up entering the NFL draft. I know there's been a report out there a week and a half ago or so that he was, but we don't know that that's true. We don't know if that's a finalized statement or not. So there's all these things in the air that can still happen. I would think that another defensive back is still in the works, even outside of Cam Martinez. But I just don't know where that guy comes from or how they squeeze him into the mix. So it'll be interesting to watch.
It's almost speculation season at this point, because they can't go visit these guys. The January 17th deadline is fastly approaching, and you kind of just sit back and wonder what's going on behind closed doors right now when it comes to the 2020 class.
Yeah, I mean, there's that Enos Rakish, the defensive back from the Dallas area, who has blown up lately. He's a 2020 cornerback. He's offered from Georgia, Alabama, Miami, all these big schools in the last 2 weeks. Ohio State is not one of those schools that's offered. I know for a fact that the Buckeyes have been reviewing his tape and evaluating him even as far back as a month ago, and the Buckeyes haven't pulled the trigger on the offer. Now, after the January 17th, when they're allowed to go out and see kids again, are we going to hear about Ryan Day stopping into this kid's high school? Maybe. I mean, it's such a key point when it comes to Ohio State recruiting, is that they really don't want to offer kids they don't know. And these relationships that they build with these kids are so important, because that's how they decide if someone's a good fit for the program or not. And there is this concept or this idea that maybe they're slow playing things and that they're going to be left in the cold for a player like Enos Rakish, because all these other teams have already offered and he's now setting up his visits. But if they're not sure who you are, they're not going to offer you. And as I've said a million times on Lettermen Row and in the past for people who have followed my work, there are no such thing as pity offers at Ohio State, and they are not going to offer a player if they don't think they can make a difference in Columbus. And If that means that they go into this next 3 weeks without offering any new defensive backs, so be it. But I don't think you're going to see any other positions really even on the table at this point, unless a player is so good that they think to themselves, "There's no way we can't we can pass this kid up." So go ahead.
And if that's the case, that kid would also have to want to come to Ohio State.
Right.
And then the number comes back up, the 89 comes back up to, okay, is there going to be room for him?
Yeah, I mean, that's going to be the catch-22 from here all the way to August. And like I said, I'm not in the business of prognosticating who's leaving, who's staying, but people are going to have to leave. That's just fact. So we are going to have to leave, and that is Spencer Holbrook. I am Jeremy Birmingham. This has been Talking Stuff, the Ohio State Recruiting Podcast, brought to you by Buyers Auto. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for watching. We will talk to you folks next time.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe below to get the latest videos from Lettermen Row.
We got Letterman Live, we've got the practice report, we got rapid reaction. Hey, and we got Buckeye IQ with Zach Bourne.
For sure. We got recruiting breakdowns with Berm. We got whatever you need. Ohio State football and Ohio State athletics, we've got you covered here at Lettermen Row.